Adrian Carter grabbed Victoria Sterling's wrist, not gently. The entire boardroom froze, 30 executives, dead silent. Nobody breathed. Victoria slowly looked down at his hand on her wrist, then looked up at him. Ice in her eyes. The kind of cold that ends careers. He didn't let go. "You haven't eaten in 14 hours, he said. "And you're about to pass out in front of your entire board." She pulled her wrist free, straightened her jacket. "Get out of my meeting, Mr. Carter." He set a protein bar on the table directly in front of her right, on top of her quarterly report, turned around, and walked out. The room stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then someone whispered, "Who does he think he is?" Nobody had an answer, but Victoria Sterling picked up the protein bar, and that was the beginning of everything. 3 days later, he called her his beloved wife by accident while she was standing right behind him. And instead of firing him, she said, "Say that again. Drop a comment right now. What city are you watching from?" I want to see how far this story travels. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Because what happens next at that family dinner? Nobody saw it coming. Not even him. The maintenance elevator at Sterling Innovations smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee, and Adrian Carter had long since stopped noticing either. He rode it alone every morning at 6:15, before the lobby filled with people in tailored suits carrying cups that cost more than his lunch. He preferred it that way. Fewer conversations meant fewer chances for someone to look at him, the way they sometimes did with that particular mixture of pity and mild confusion, as though they couldn't quite understand why a man his age, his size, his obvious competence, was still fixing broken pipes and replacing ceiling tiles in a building full of millionaires. Adrian wasn't bothered by it. He had learned a long time ago that the opinion of people who didn't know his name wasn't worth the energy it took to care about. He had a daughter to raise, a mortgage to pay, and a job to do. That was enough. His name was Adrian Carter, 34 years old, 6'1". Hands rough enough from real work that you could feel the calluses when he shook yours. He kept his dark hair cut short and neat, not because anyone required it, but because his daughter Lily told him once that he looked more like a superhero when his hair wasn't messy. She was 8 years old and the only person on this earth whose opinion he actually cared about adjusting his appearance for. He'd been raising her alone for 3 years. Her mother, Dana, had died of a brain aneurysm on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No warning, no goodbye. She was here, and then she wasn't, and the world kept moving forward with the total indifference it reserves for private tragedies. And Adrian had stood in his kitchen, holding a casserole dish a neighbor brought over, and understood for the first time what it meant to be completely, structurally alone. He didn't fall apart. He almost did. There were nights in the first year when Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, and the weight of everything pressed down on him so hard he sat on the kitchen floor and just stared at the refrigerator. For 20 minutes, because moving felt impossible. But he always got up. He always made breakfast in the morning. He always drove Lily to school with her hair brushed, and her lunch packed, and her backpack zipped, and he never, not once, let her see him drown. Because she needed a father more than he needed to fall apart. So he got up every single day. He found the job at Sterling Innovations 18 months ago through a placement agency that specialized in building operations and facilities management. The pay was better than his previous position. The benefits covered Lily's dental appointments, and the hours, while long, allowed him to be home by 7 most evenings. The work itself, maintaining a 42-story office tower, managing its mechanical systems, coordinating repairs and inspections, suited him precisely because it was honest. Something was broken. You fixed it. It worked again. No ambiguity, no politics, no performance. He was good at his job. Excellent, actually. The building ran better under his oversight than it had in years. But in a company where executives measured their worth in quarterly earnings and stock portfolios, the man who kept the lights on was largely decorative. Invisible. Background. That was fine with Adrian. He didn't need to be seen. He needed to do his job. Collect his paycheck. Get home to Lily. Help her with her 3rd-grade math homework. Read her exactly 2 chapters of whatever book they were currently working through together. Right now. It was a story about a girl who discovers she can talk to horses and wake up the next morning and do it again. That was the life he had built from the wreckage of the one he lost. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And then, on a Wednesday evening in mid-October, the life he had carefully, deliberately constructed was interrupted by a woman who had never once asked for anyone's help. Adrian was on the 38th floor at 7:47 p.m. when he heard it. Not a crash, not a scream, something quieter and therefore more alarming, the soft, controlled sough of something giving way. He was replacing a faulty thermostat panel in the corridor outside the executive suites, a job he'd scheduled for after hours, precisely because he knew the floor would be empty. The executive team left by 6. Security did their rounds at 8. He had a clean window, except the floor wasn't empty. The light was still on in the corner office. The corner office was always the corner office. Every company had one. The one that was bigger than the others, with better windows, better furniture, and a closed door that most employees treated the way medieval villagers treated the castle gate, with profound respect and zero intention of approaching uninvited. Victoria Sterling's office. Adrian had seen her in person perhaps a dozen times over 18 months. Enough to form an impression, not enough to claim he understood anything about her. She was 28 years old, which struck most people as extraordinary for a CEO of her company's size. Sterling Innovations had revenues north of $400 million annually, operated in 11 countries, and employed over 3,000 people. That a woman not yet 30 was running, it commanded either awe or deep resentment, depending on the person doing the observing. The employees, as a general rule, feared her. Not because she was cruel. Adrian had never witnessed cruelty, but because she was exacting in a way that left no room for comfortable mediocrity. She noticed everything. She remembered everything. In a meeting, she could identify the one flawed assumption buried inside 40 slides of data and dismantle an entire business case in under 2 minutes, politely and with complete accuracy, while the presenter stood there trying to understand what had just happened to them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The elevator doors that evening opened on a floor that should have been empty and quiet, and instead Adrian stepped into a corridor where the corner office light burned like a warning, and the sound he had heard, that soft, controlled collapse, was now identifiable as a very quiet, very deliberate series of slow breaths coming from just the other side of a door left 2 inches ajar. He stood in the hallway and listened. The breathing wasn't right. He'd heard breathing like that before, in the months after Dana died, when he was still learning how to carry a grief that weighed more than anything he'd ever lifted. Controlled breathing was what you did when you were determined not to let anyone know you were struggling. It was the sound of someone applying enormous effort to appearing fine. Adrian knew that sound. He knew it the way you know a song you've been trying to forget. He knocked twice on the open door and pushed it further open. Victoria Sterling was seated at her desk with both hands flat on its surface, her eyes closed, her posture so rigidly upright that the effort of maintaining it was visible. Her jacket was draped over the back of her chair. Her hair, which was always impeccably controlled during business hours, had a few strands loose around her face. On the desk in front of her were 3 open binders, a laptop with 17 browser tabs visible, 2 phones, 1 personal, 1 corporate, and a half-eaten granola bar that looked like it had been there since morning. She heard the door and opened her eyes. The look on her face when she saw him was the most unguarded thing he had ever seen from her, a flash of surprise, so genuine it briefly stripped away every layer of corporate armor she wore. For just a half second, she looked exactly her age. Young, tired, caught. Then the armor came back. The thermostat in this section keeps dropping smack to 61 degrees. He said it evenly, gesturing toward the wall panel. I'm replacing the unit. I scheduled it for after hours, because I figured the floor would be clear. A beat. You can continue. He moved to the panel and opened his toolkit. She returned her attention to the laptop. Neither of them spoke for 3 minutes. Then he heard the chair move. He glanced back and watched Victoria Sterling stand up from her desk and then stop, grip the edge of the desk with both hands, and go completely still. He was across the room in 4 steps. Hey, he kept his voice low. What do you need? I'm fine. You're holding onto the desk like it's the only thing keeping you vertical. Silence. When did you last eat? He looked at the granola bar. That's not eating, by the way. That's decorating. Something flickered in her eyes that might, under different circumstances, have been the beginning of a smile. I had a protein bar at noon. It's almost 8 o'clock. I'm aware of what time it is. When did you last sleep? That's not relevant. It's relevant if you're about to hit the floor in your own office. She didn't answer that one. Adrian looked around the space, found the small executive kitchen attached to the suite, a privilege of the corner office, and moved to it. He filled a glass with water and came back and set it in front of her with the direct, no argument authority of someone who had spent 3 years being the only adult in a house and had learned that the most effective way to care for someone was to simply do the and not debate it first. Sit down, she sat. She drank the water, and he watched the rigid line of her shoulders drop, just slightly. As though the simple act of someone telling her what to do, someone else carrying one small decision, allowed her body to exhale something it had been holding for a very long time. You don't have to stay, she said. I know. It would be highly inappropriate for a maintenance employee to remain in the CEO's office after hours without a work-related justification. The thermostat still needs replacing. She looked at the wall panel, then back at him. Of course it does. He went back to the thermostat. She didn't ask him to leave again. For the next 40 minutes, they occupied the same space in a silence that was, remarkably, not uncomfortable. He worked. She worked. The building outside the windows had gone dark, except for scattered offices in neighboring towers. The city moved far below them, indifferent and constant. He was nearly finished when she spoke. Why did you come in? You could have heard me and kept walking. Most people would have. Adrian set down his screwdriver. Most people don't actually notice. They hear something, and they decide they probably imagined it, because acknowledging it means they have to do something about it. And you decided to do something about it. I decided to knock on the door. She considered him, with an expression he couldn't fully interpret. Not quite suspicion, not quite curiosity. Something more complicated, like someone recalibrating a set of assumptions that had just been quietly proved wrong. You're not afraid of me, should I be? Most of my employees are. I fix broken things in the building. If I was afraid of the building, I'd be in the wrong profession. For the second time that evening, something almost reached her face. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. But the principle holds. Fear is expensive. You spend all your energy maintaining it, and then you don't have anything left for the actual work. She was quiet. Then Carter, isn't it? Adrian Carter. He was mildly surprised she knew his name. Building operations. Yes, you've been here 18 months. Your efficiency reports are in the top tier for your department. You resolved the HVAC issue on floors 22 through 25 last spring that 2 previous contractors couldn't diagnose. It was a straightforward sensor calibration problem. 2 contractors charged us $40,000 in combined fees to not figure that out. He shrugged. They were looking for a complicated answer, because complicated answers cost more. She stared at him. Why are you still here? She said slowly, fixing thermostats in other people's buildings. It wasn't a condescending question. It was a genuine one, asked with the directness of someone who didn't understand the gap between what a person was capable of and what they were currently doing. My daughter, he said simply. The hours work. The benefits work. She needs consistency right now. Something crossed Victoria Sterling's face. A softening so subtle he almost missed it. How old is she? 8. Her name? Lily. Is her mother? She stopped herself. I apologize. That's personal. Her mother died 3 years ago. The room held that information for a moment. I'm sorry, Victoria said, and it came out with none of the automatic quality that phrase usually carried. It sounded like she meant it. Thank you. He finished the thermostat installation. She organized the binders on her desk. The silence between them was different now. Not the absence of conversation, but the comfortable, uncrowded space that only exists between people who have briefly allowed each other to be real. He was packing up his toolkit when both their phones went off, simultaneously. His was his personal cell. Hers was the corporate line. He answered without looking, because his first instinct whenever his phone rang after 7 p.m. was Lily. The voice on the other end was the company's executive assistant, Sarah, who apparently was calling both of them at once to confirm tomorrow morning's schedule. Just checking in about tomorrow's 7 a.m. review with Ms. Sterling. Adrian wasn't listening to the words. He was thinking about the fact that Victoria was still at the desk, looking at her laptop with the specific expression of someone who had just found another problem to add to a list that was already too long. And he was thinking about how she'd looked when he first walked in, and he was thinking not for any particular reason, just a tired thought from a man who spent too many evenings in an empty house about Dana, about what it used to feel like to have someone to check on. Is she all right to finalize the presentation materials tonight, or should I reschedule? Don't worry, he said, into the phone, without thinking, without a single conscious decision, from some automatic, worn smooth part of him that still responded to inquiries about the person he was supposed to be caring for. I'll take care of my beloved wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of an empty building. The silence of a moment that has just changed shape. Adrian's brain caught up with his mouth. Approximately 1 full second later, he lowered the phone slowly. Victoria Sterling had not moved. She was standing 3 feet away from him, perfectly still, looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, not in 18 months of working in the same building, not in a single meeting or corridor encounter or elevator ride. It wasn't anger, it wasn't amusement. It was something he couldn't name. Something careful and very alert, like the moment just before a key turns in a lock. That wasn't. He heard Sarah still talking faintly from the phone. He raised it back to his ear. I need to call you back. He ended the call. Miss Sterling, I am genuinely sorry. I was distracted and I spoke without thinking. That was completely. Say that again. Her voice was even. Quiet. But something in it stopped him completely. I apologize. I heard your apology. I'm not asking for your apology. She took 1 step closer. I'm asking you to say it again. He stared at her. Victoria Sterling, the woman who had made a department head cry during a quarterly review, who had turned down a merger offer from a company 3 times their size, because she didn't like the ethics of their supply chain, who had never, in anyone's recollection, shown a moment of personal vulnerability in a professional setting, was standing in her office at 8 o'clock at night, looking at a maintenance technician, like he had said the truest thing anyone had said to her in years. I'll take care of my beloved wife, he repeated quietly. She held the words in the air between them for a moment, and then slowly something changed in her face. Not the armor coming back. The opposite. A small, controlled, genuine smile, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone, that arrives only because it can't be helped. Interesting, she said softly. Miss Sterling. Victoria, she said it simply. Like a decision. In this office after 8 p.m., you may call me Victoria. He didn't know what to do with that. So he said nothing. She moved back to her desk and sat down, and for a moment she seemed to be considering something very carefully, the way she approached a complex business problem, moving it from angle to angle, testing its weight. Then she looked up. Do you have somewhere to be right now, Adrian? He thought of Lily, asleep at his sister's apartment 3 miles away, where she stayed on his late nights. He thought of the empty house waiting for him. He thought of the granola bar on the desk and the way Victoria had gripped the edge of that desk like it was holding her upright. Not immediately. Then sit down. He sat. I need to explain something to you, she said, and I need you to listen without offering your opinion until I'm finished. Can you do that? Yes. She straightened a pen on her desk. An organizing gesture, a way of arranging her thoughts. My family has been planning my engagement for 8 months, she said. The man in question is the son of a business partner of my father's. It's a merger dressed as a marriage. I have been managing the delay of this announcement through a combination of schedule conflicts, travel, and strategic unavailability. She paused. This weekend I run out of conflicts. Adrian said nothing. He was listening the way he'd promised. There is a family gathering on Saturday evening. My parents intend to announce the engagement at dinner. I have been informed, not asked, informed that my attendance is mandatory and my cooperation is expected. And you don't intend to cooperate. Astute of you, a dry note in her voice. I do not. But arriving alone is not an option. Arriving alone confirms to my family that I am what they have always believed me to be, a woman who has sacrificed every personal relationship for professional ambition, and who therefore needs them to manage her future for her. He was beginning to understand where this was going, and the understanding did not entirely comfort him. "You want me to come with you?" She didn't look away. "I want you to come with me as my husband, for one evening. Long enough to demonstrate that I am not available for the arrangement they've prepared. Miss Sterling." "Victoria," he said it carefully, "I fix things in your building. I make a salary that your company's intern probably considers inadequate. Your family is going to see through this in about 30 seconds. They won't." "How do you know?" "Because what they're looking for isn't a financial statement. They're looking for evidence that I've made a choice. A real one. That I am not the cold, untethered machine they spend most of their family dinners worrying about." She leveled her gaze at him. "And you, the man who just spoke about his wife with more warmth than most people ever genuinely feel about anyone, are exactly what a real choice looks like." The room was very quiet. Adrian looked at his hands. The calluses. The faint scar on his left palm from a piece of sheet metal that had caught him wrong 3 years ago. 2 weeks after Dana's funeral, when he was back at work because standing still felt more dangerous than moving. "My daughter," he said, "will not be mentioned, will not be at risk. This is a single evening, and I am asking you for your time, nothing else. This is a deeply unusual request." Everything about this conversation has been unusual. That ship sailed approximately 40 minutes ago. He looked up at her. Something in him, the part that had spent 3 years being careful, practical, strategic, the part that made the sensible decision every time, was being very quiet right now. Something else was speaking instead. The part that had heard the breathing behind the door. The part that recognized exhaustion, wearing the uniform of strength. The part that had sat on a kitchen floor in the dark and eventually, always gotten back up. "One evening," he said, "one evening, and I don't lie. If they ask me directly about money or background or my professional history, I answer honestly. I wouldn't have it any other way." He stood up. She stood up. There was a beat between them, where neither of them quite knew what the correct protocol was for what had just been agreed to. Because there was no protocol for it. Because it was not a normal thing. Then he picked up his toolkit. "My daughter's name is Lily," he said, "and she just finished a chapter book for the first time by herself. She read the whole last chapter out loud to me, sitting on the kitchen counter in her pajamas with her feet swinging. I want you to know that, because if you're going to tell your family you chose me, you should know what you're choosing." Victoria Sterling looked at him across a desk covered in the evidence of a life devoted to professional achievement. "Lily," she repeated. "Yeah, tell her congratulations on the book." He almost smiled. "I will." He walked to the door. "Adrian." He stopped. "What I said earlier, that you're not afraid of me." She paused. "Most people aren't honest about the things that scare them. You were honest about Lily. That's rare." He stood in the doorway of her office, with the city spread out behind her, and the thermostat on the wall freshly replaced and humming quietly, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. "You don't scare me, Victoria. You're just carrying something heavy and pretending it weighs nothing. I recognize it because I've done it." She didn't respond. But she was still looking at him when he stepped into the hallway, and the expression on her face was one he'd seen only once before in Lily's face, the night she finished that chapter book, when she realized she'd done something she hadn't fully believed she could do. It was the look of someone encountering, unexpectedly, the specific relief of being seen. He rode the maintenance elevator back down alone. The car smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. He didn't notice either. He called his sister from the parking garage. "How's she doing?" "She's asleep. She finished her homework in about 11 minutes, and then informed me that fractions are mathematically unfair, and asked if I thought the government invented them on purpose to make kids miserable." His sister's voice was warm with it. "She's fine, Adrian. How are you?" He sat in his truck in the empty garage and thought about the question with more attention than he usually gave it. Something happened tonight. Good something or bad something? He considered. "I genuinely don't know yet." A pause on the line. "Should I be worried?" "No." He turned the key in the ignition. The engine caught. "I'll tell you about it later." He drove home through October streets that were starting to feel like winter, past the diner where he and Dana used to get breakfast on Sunday mornings before Lily was born, past the elementary school where Lily had started second grade last year and cried on the first day, and then cried on the second day, and then on the third day, walked in like she owned the building. And he thought about a woman sitting alone at a desk with a half-eaten granola bar and 17 browser tabs, and the kind of exhaustion that lives so deep in a person it stops registering as exhaustion and starts registering as just the way things are. He thought about a voice saying, "Say that again." He thought about what it meant that she hadn't laughed. He didn't know yet what the next few days would look like, but something had shifted. In the building, in the evening, in himself. Something had been replaced, and like any good repair, you didn't always know right away whether it would hold. But you did the work, and you waited, and you found out. Saturday was 4 days away. Adrian drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and his mind somewhere else entirely, replaying the conversation in Victoria's office, the way you replay a moment where you made a decision before you fully understood what you were deciding. The city moved past the windows in streaks of orange and white light. He stopped at a red light on Meridian Avenue and sat there even after it turned green, until the car behind him honked. He pulled forward. 4 days. He had agreed to walk into a room full of wealthy, powerful strangers and pretend to be the husband of a woman who was, by any measurable standard, completely out of his world. Not just financially, not just professionally. In every way that the people in that room would use to assess another human being, Adrian Carter was going to fall short. He knew it. He wasn't bothered by it, exactly. He had stopped letting other people's measuring sticks determine his worth a long time ago, but he was clear-eyed about what Saturday night was going to look like from the outside. A maintenance technician walking into a Sterling family dinner. He almost laughed. Almost. He parked in front of his house and sat in the truck for a moment longer. The porch light was on. He always left it on when he came home after dark, an old habit from the first year after Dane died, when coming home to a dark house felt like something he couldn't sustain. He looked at the light and thought about what Dana would have said about all of this. She would have laughed first. A real laugh, the kind that involved her whole face. And then she would have said, "Adrian, when was the last time you did something that scared you?" He got out of the truck. Inside, the house was the specific quiet of a home that contains a child not empty but resting. He moved through the kitchen, checked that everything was locked, poured a glass of water, and stood at the counter and thought about the next 4 days. Thursday, he had his regular shift. Friday, Lily had her school reading presentation. She'd been practicing it for 2 weeks, and he had listened to her rehearse it approximately 47 times and knew every word. Saturday morning was her soccer practice. Saturday evening was the Sterling family dinner. He needed a suit. The one he owned was the one he'd worn to Dana's funeral, and he was not wearing that one. He needed to tell someone, not everything, not the full context, but enough that if something went sideways, someone who loved him knew where he was. He texted his sister, "We should talk tomorrow. Nothing bad. Just unusual," she replied in 30 seconds. "I knew something happened. Call me in the morning before 7. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for 2 hours. Thursday at Sterling Innovations passed the way. Thursdays usually did a facilities coordination meeting at 8. A coolant system check on the 21st floor. A lighting malfunction on the 14th that turned out to be a loose connection so simple he felt mild embarrassment on behalf of the electrician who'd logged it as a complex repair. He didn't see Victoria. He hadn't expected to. The 38th floor was not part of his regular rotation, and there was no professional reason for him to be there. They moved in different orbits. That was the baseline. What surprised him was that he noticed her absence. He caught himself, once, glancing at the elevator indicator. When it stopped on 38, registering something not quite anticipation, more like awareness, and then deliberately redirected his attention to the coolant gauge in front of him. He was not a man who made things complicated. He was not going to start now. At noon, he was eating lunch in the facilities break room, a sandwich Lily had helped pack the night before, which contained, he discovered, 1 slice of cheese, one slice of turkey, approximately twice the necessary amount of mustard, and a small drawing of a sun on the inside of the wrapper when his phone buzzed. "Unknown number," he answered. "This is Victoria." He set down the sandwich. "How did you get this number?" "I'm the CEO of the company you work for. Getting a phone number is not a significant operational challenge." He couldn't argue with that. "What do you need?" "Logistics. For Saturday." A pause. "And I want to tell you about my family before you walk into a room with them. You should know what you're walking into." "All right. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for coffee this afternoon? There's a place on 5th called Emery's. 4 o'clock. It won't take long." He looked at his schedule. His shift ended at 3:30. Lily was at his sister's until 6. 4 o'clock works. "Good." She hung up. He looked at the small sun drawing on his sandwich wrapper for a moment. Then he finished his lunch. Emery's was a coffee shop that occupied the ground floor of a brownstone on 5th Avenue. The kind of place that was genuinely good without performing its goodness. No exposed Edison bulbs. No chalkboard menu with 17 font styles. Just good coffee, solid wooden tables, and the ambient sound of a city moving outside the windows. Victoria was already there when he arrived. She had changed out of whatever she'd been wearing at the office. Dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, her hair down. She looked, startlingly, like a completely different person. Not softer exactly, but less armored. Like she'd removed several layers of professional infrastructure, and what remained was just her. She had 2 coffees on the table already. "I guessed black," she said. "That's right." He sat down across from her. She pushed one of the cups toward him without ceremony, and they spent a moment in the slightly unusual silence of 2 people who have never shared a social space before. Recalibrating. She spoke first. "My father is Richard Sterling. He started this company 40 years sterling and spent the last decades systematically preparing to hand it to my brother, who had no interest in running it and eventually left for a career in architecture. So it came to you. It came to me. I had been working toward it my entire adult life, so the outcome was not a surprise. What was a surprise was how my parents responded to it." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "They'd expected my brother to run the company, and me to marry well and sit on a charity board somewhere. When the roles inverted, they recalibrated. They decided that if I was going to run the company, I needed a partner who could anchor the family's social position. Someone from an equivalent circle, the fiancé, Marcus Hale. His father owns Hale Capital Group. The merger of our families would create a combined holding structure worth approximately $2 billion, a beat. That's how my parents described their daughter's future. As a combined holding structure, Adrian was quiet. "Marcus is not a bad person," she continued. "He's exactly what he was raised to be. Entitled, charming in the correct social contexts, and completely uninterested in me as a human being. He wants the alliance. I am the vehicle for it. The difference between Marcus and my parents is that Marcus at least has the honesty to be direct about that. And your parents aren't. My parents believe they love me. They probably do, in the way that people love things they've invested significant effort in. But what they mean when they say love is closer to what most people mean when they say investment. They want to see a return." He looked at her. There was no self-pity in how she said it. No performance of wound. It was stated with the same calm precision she probably used in board meetings. Here is the data. Here is the analysis. Here is the conclusion. That somehow made it worse. "How long has this been going on?" "The pressure to marry Marcus, specifically 8 months. The general campaign to marry me to someone acceptable, since I was approximately 19 years old and made the mistake of graduating top of my class, which my mother interpreted as a sign that I was becoming frightening to normal men and needed to be made less so immediately." She said that, not in those words. "My mother is a sophisticated woman. She operates through implication. And your grandfather? You mentioned him." Or, he stopped. "Actually, you didn't mention him. I was getting ahead of myself. Tell me who's going to be in that room." She appreciated the correction. He could see it. "My grandfather, Harold Sterling. He is 81 years old, has been retired for 12 years, and is the only person in my family whose opinion I genuinely respect. He built the first Sterling Industries location with his own hands, before there was anything to call a company. He's unpredictable and blunt, and my parents find him exhausting. I'm already looking forward to meeting him." Something crossed her face. Amusement, brief and real. "He will like you," she said. "That's either going to help significantly or make things considerably worse, depending on how the evening goes." "Who else?" "My parents. My mother's sister, Carol, who exists primarily to take notes on what happens and report back to the family network. Carol's husband, who I'm not sure has spoken an original sentence in 22 years. Two cousins who are my age and have spent most of their adult lives finding creative ways to express their resentment that I was given the company. And Marcus. Marcus is going to be there. My father invited him before I found a reason to object, which is why this Saturday and not a different Saturday." Adrian nodded slowly. "And what exactly happens when I walk in?" "They ask you questions, some politely, some not. They'll want to know your profession, your background, your financial situation, and they'll frame all of it as friendly curiosity while making absolutely clear that they find the answers inadequate." She met his eyes. "I told you I need you to be honest. I meant it. Do not dress up what you do or what you earn. Any fabrication will unravel immediately, and that's worse than the truth. I had no intention of fabricating anything. I know. That's partly why I asked you." He sat with that for a moment. "What's our story? How did we meet?" She had clearly already thought about this. The truth modified slightly. "We met at the company. We spent time together after hours. Somewhere in there, something real developed." She paused. "The modification is the timeline. We've been together for 6 months. Quietly. I'm intensely private, which everyone in my family already believes, so that part requires no selling. 6 months, is that a problem?" he considered. "No. But if we've been together 6 months, there are things I would know about you. And things you'd know about me." She nodded. "Go ahead. What do you do when you're not working?" A pause. Longer than expected. "That's a harder question than it should be. Take your time." She looked at the coffee cup. "I run. Early mornings before 6. When there's nobody on the sidewalk. I read mostly history. Occasionally bad thrillers, which I would prefer you didn't mention to anyone. I have a ridiculous collection of houseplants that I am genuinely bad at keeping alive, which my housekeeper finds frustrating because she is the one who replaces them. Favorite book, Team of Rivals. It's about Lincolns." "I know what it's about." She blinked. "You've read it." "Dana, my wife, was a history teacher. We had about 400 books in the house." "I've read most of them," he said it simply. Not as a correction, not as a point to be made. Just a fact. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What was she like? He didn't answer immediately. Not because the question was unwelcome, but because it deserved an honest answer, and not a quick one. "Stubborn," he finally said. She had opinions about everything, and she stated them with a confidence that was occasionally terrifying. She believed very strongly in doing things right the first time and had very little patience for the kind of people who phone it in. He paused. "Lily has her eyes, and her stubbornness, and her laugh." Victoria looked at him. "She sounds formidable." She absolutely was. "A beat. You loved her very much, yes, is it?" She stopped herself. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I was going to ask if it's difficult to talk about her. Not anymore. The first year, yes. Now it mostly just feels true. She was here. She was real. She was extraordinary. That's not sad. That's just what happened." Victoria turned her coffee cup in her hands again. He'd noticed she did this when she was processing something, a physical grounding, while her mind moved. "My family is going to ask about her," she said. "If we've been together 6 months, they'll want to know your history. Then I'll tell them. They may use it. Use it how? As leverage. As evidence that you're not fully present. That you're still." She hesitated. "My mother in particular tends to look for psychological footholds. She may try to suggest that your grief makes you unstable, or that Lily's needs make you unavailable." Adrian looked at her steadily. Let her try. Something in the way he said it, not aggressive, not defensive, simply grounded in a certainty had been built through 3 years of her surviving things that would have broken a different kind of person. Made Victoria stop talking for a moment. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the office, like she was recalibrating again. "All right," she said quietly. "What do I call you?" he asked, in front of them. "Victoria. I don't have a family nickname. My mother tried to call me Vicky when I was 12, and I informed her I preferred my full name. She's never attempted it since, and you'll call me Adrian. Yes, not my husband, not unless the moment requires it. They looked at each other across the small wooden table. This is a strange situation, he said. It is, but you're not nervous. She considered it honestly. I'm nervous about my family. I'm not nervous about you. A pause. You're the least alarming part of Saturday. I'll put that on my resume. She almost laughed. Not quite, but close enough that he counted it. He finished his coffee. One more thing, he said, pulling on his jacket. Before Saturday, I want you to know something about why I said yes. She waited. It wasn't because you're the CEO and I was worried about my job. I want to be clear about that. I didn't assume. Let me finish, he said it gently, not cutting her off, stopping her reflex to deflect. I said yes because you're a person who needed something, and I was in a position to help. That's it. I'm not doing this because I want anything from you. No promotions, no favors, nothing. If at any point Saturday night you change your mind, you tell me and we leave. That's the deal. The afternoon light came through the window and caught the side of her face, and Victoria Sterling looked at Adrian Carter with the particular expression of someone who has just been told something they have needed to hear for a very long time and wasn't expecting it from this action. Understood, she said quietly. Good. He pushed back his chair. I need to go pick up my daughter. Of course. He stood. Then paused. What time on Saturday? Car picks us up at 6. Dinner is at 7. I'll be ready at 5:45. She nodded. He was halfway to the door when she called after him. Adrian. He turned. Thank you, she said it simply. The way someone says something true when they've stopped, trying to make it sound like less than it is. He nodded once. Then he left. He picked Lily up at 5:40 and she talked for the entire car ride home about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend Sophie over the correct way to organize a bookshelf alphabetically. By author versus by color of cover, a debate that, in Lily's telling, had reached nearly diplomatic proportions. Sophie, he says. Color makes it prettier, she reported, sitting in the back seat with her backpack on her lap, and the absolute moral conviction of an 8-year-old who has thought seriously about something. But that's not how you find anything. If I'm looking for a book, I don't remember what color it is. I remember who wrote it. That's a fair point. I told her that. She said I was being bossy. Were you being bossy? A long pause. Maybe a little. There's a difference between being right and winning, he said. Another pause. Longer this time. Did you make that up or did you read it somewhere? I think your mom said it first. Silence from the back seat. The comfortable kind, the kind Lily slipped into whenever Dana came up. Not sad exactly, but thoughtful, like she was turning something over in her mind. Okay, she said finally. I'll tell Sophie she has a point about the color thing. That's very mature of you. I know, she agreed, entirely without irony. He pulled into the driveway and helped her with her backpack. And after dinner, pasta, Lily's request, always Lily's request, and homework, and 2 chapters of the horse book. After he had turned off her light and stood in the hallway, for the half-second he always stood there just to listen to the quiet that meant she was safe and asleep, he sat down at the kitchen table with a notepad. He wrote Victoria's name at the top. Then he wrote the name she'd given him. Richard. Her mother, he realized he didn't know her name. Carol. Marcus Harold. He underlined Harold. He thought about what Victoria had said. He will like you. That's either going to help significantly or make things considerably worse. He thought about the way she said it, not with dread, but with a kind of wry acceptance of the family she'd been given. The way you accept the weather. You didn't choose it. You learned to navigate it. He thought about how she'd looked in Emery's, in the jeans and the gray sweater, turning her coffee cup in her hands. How she'd said, "Thank you," at the door with 0 performance in it. He put the notepad away. He was not, he told himself firmly, going to overcomplicate this. It was one evening, a favor for a person who needed one. He had done harder things. He did hard things every day. He went to bed at 10:30. He was asleep within minutes. Friday was Lily's reading presentation. He sat in the 3rd row of her classroom on a chair designed for someone roughly 4 feet tall, knees bent at an architectural angle, surrounded by other parents who were experiencing the same situation with varying degrees of grace. The room smelled like crayons and the specific brand of orange-scented hand sanitizer the school used. Every wall had something on it: artwork, multiplication tables, a banner that read "Readers are leaders" in letters, that had been carefully painted by children who were clearly just learning how to carefully paint things. Lily stood at the front of the room in her blue sweater, holding her book with both hands. She looked nervous, in the way she always looked nervous, not visibly, but with a particular stillness that Adrian recognized because he knew every version of his daughter the way you know a song by heart. She started reading. Within 3 sentences, the nervousness was gone. She read clearly, with genuine expression, pausing at the right moments, looking up from the page periodically, the way the teacher had taught them. The other kids were quiet. Genuinely quiet, not enforced silence, but the organic quiet of people who are actually listening. When she finished, the room applauded. She looked up and found his face immediately, the way she always did in any room, with the specific radar children have for their person, and her whole face transformed into the grin she saved for moments when she was proudly, completely pleased with herself. He clapped louder than anyone else in the room, and did not care even slightly. Afterward, in the hallway, while kids collected their backpacks and parents made small talk, Lily grabbed his hand. "Did I do good?" "You did great," Mrs. Patterson said. "My pacing was excellent." "Mrs. Patterson is correct. What's pacing?" "The speed you read at. You didn't rush." She considered this. "I practiced a lot." "I know. I was there for most of the practicing." "All of it," she corrected. "All of it," he agreed. She held his hand while they walked to the car, and he thought, not for the first time, that this right here, this moment, her hand in his, her voice telling him something she was proud of, was the specific and irreplaceable thing he was protecting when he made every careful, practical, unglamorous decision in his life. In the car, she turned to him. "Dad, are you going out tomorrow night?" He'd mentioned to her earlier in the week that he had a work event Saturday evening. He'd kept it simple. "Yeah, a work dinner. Will you be home by 9? "Probably closer to 10. She thought about this. "Okay, then is it a fancy dinner?" "Kind of." "Are you wearing your good jacket?" "I'm actually buying a new one." She looked at him with the particular suspicion of an 8-year-old who has detected an anomaly. "Why do you need a new jacket for a work dinner?" "Because the one I have is old." "Dad, is this a date?" He kept his eyes on the road. "It's a work dinner, Lily." A long silence. "Okay," she said, in the tone of someone who has decided to file this information away for later review. He let it go. Saturday morning was soccer practice. Lily's team was called the Comets, a name they had voted on themselves at the start of the season, and which Lily had campaigned for over several competing options, on the grounds that Comets were fast and on fire, which she felt was aspirational. They were 7 and 8 years old, and played with the specific chaos that characterized all youth soccer: enthusiastic, directionally inconsistent, and deeply committed. Adrian stood on the sideline in the October cold with a cup of coffee and watched his daughter chase the ball across the field with the same absolute determination she brought to everything, and let himself be here, fully, in this moment. Because he'd learned in the hardest possible way that the moments you're fully in are the ones that stay. After practice, they stopped at the diner near the park for pancakes, which was their post-soccer tradition, had been since Lily joined the team 2 years ago. She ordered chocolate chip. He ordered plain. She stole bites of his with the boldness of someone who considered sharing a mere social formality and not a genuine constraint on her behavior. "Dad, yeah, do you think I'll get to play forward next season?" "I think you're working toward it. Coach Davies says I have good instincts, but I telegraph my moves." "What does telegraph mean?" "I was going to ask you." He smiled. "It means people can tell what you're about to do before you do it. You give yourself away." She processed this with great seriousness. "How do you not do that?" "Practice, and learning to be a little less predictable." She stabbed a chocolate chip pancake with her fork and held it up like she was examining it for structural integrity. "You're not very predictable," she said. "What makes you say that?" "You bought a new jacket." He looked at her. She looked back at him with her mother's eyes, and her mother's expression, the one that said, "I see you, and I'm not remotely fooled." "Just eat your pancakes," he said. She ate her pancakes, but she was smiling. The car that arrived at 5:45 was not the kind of car Adrian usually encountered. It was a black sedan with interior so quiet it felt like being inside. a room that had been specifically engineered to eliminate the concept of outside. The driver knew Victoria's address, and that was apparently all the information required of anyone. Victoria was waiting outside her building. She was wearing a deep navy dress, structured, professional, nothing extravagant, and a coat the color of dark charcoal. Her hair was up. Her posture was the one she wore to work, impeccably controlled, every movement deliberate. She got in. She looked at him. He had found a suit at a store downtown on Saturday morning, after soccer practice, before pancakes. Charcoal gray, well-fitted, nothing that pretended to be more expensive than it was. He'd bought it because Victoria had told him not to fabricate anything, and he'd said that principle extended to clothes. He looked like what he was, a man who cleaned up well. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, and then looked forward. "You look good," she said. "You sound surprised." "I'm recalibrating." Again, it's becoming a habit. The car moved through Saturday evening traffic. Manhattan outside the windows, lit and moving. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Focused. Not nervous. I've been walking into rooms that wanted to diminish me since I was 22 years old. I've learned to treat it as cardio." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "And you?" She looked at him sideways. "How are you feeling?" He thought about it honestly. "Ready," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "My mother's name is Eleanor, by the way. I realized I didn't tell you. Eleanor. She'll be polite to you initially. Perfectly polite. The kind of polite that feels like a dental probe. And your father? Direct. He'll shake your hand and look you in the eye and ask you a question he already knows the answer to, just to see if you'll be honest about it. He respects honesty, actually. He just doesn't always recognize it when it arrives in a package he wasn't expecting. And Marcus? A pause. Watch Marcus. He smiles very easily and asks questions that sound like interest and function as research. He's looking for the angle. What's his angle tonight? Exposing you. He thinks if he can make you look inadequate, I'll have no choice but to accept the original arrangement. Adrian turned his head and looked at her. Victoria. Yes, he's not going to find an angle. She held his gaze. "I know," she said quietly. "That's why I asked you." The car slowed. Through the window, a residential street in the kind of neighborhood where the houses sat back from the sidewalk, behind mature trees and iron fencing, where the light from inside the homes was warm and controlled, and where everything was exactly as curated as it appeared. A house a home, technically, but the word felt slightly insufficient with lights on in every window. The driver stopped. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Victoria said quietly, almost to herself, "My grandfather once told me that the bravest thing a person can do is walk into a room where nobody wants them and refuse to leave. Smart man, the smartest person I know." She paused. "He'll want to talk to you. Alone, probably. He does that, takes people aside. My parents find it deeply irritating. What does he talk about? Truthfully, whatever's actually on his mind, which is always something unexpected." She looked at the house. "Don't be afraid of him. I'm not afraid of anyone in that house." She turned to look at him. And, for a moment, just a moment, the armor shifted, and he saw what was underneath it. Not weakness. Something much more specific than that. The face of a woman who had been alone in a particular and invisible way for a very long time, and who was sitting in a car outside her family's house, about to do something that terrified her, and who was sitting next to someone who had, without any particular planning, become the only person she trusted to walk in with her. Then the armor came back. She reached for the door handle. "Shall we?" He was already opening his side. He got out first and came around and offered his hand as she stepped out, not because anyone asked him to, not because it was part of the performance, but because it was what you did when the person beside you needed to walk into something hard, and you were there. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, steady. She didn't let go. They walked toward the house together. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her late 50s stood in the doorway, elegant in the specific way of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of appearing effortless, with light hair and Victoria's eyes and a smile that was exactly as warm as it needed to be and not 1 degree more. Eleanor Sterling looked at Victoria. Then she looked at Adrian. The smile didn't change. But something behind her eyes shifted, a rapid, subtle assessment that took less than 2 seconds, and covered everything from his shoes to his posture to the way he was holding her daughter's hand. "Victoria," she said warmly. "Mother." Victoria leaned in for the mandatory cheek kiss. "This is Adrian." Eleanor Sterling extended her hand. Adrian took it. "It's very nice to meet you," she said, with the warmth of someone reading from a script that had been carefully designed to sound like it wasn't a script. "Thank you for having me," Adrian said. Simple, genuine. Nothing extra. Eleanor looked at him for half a second longer than necessary. Then she stepped back and held the door open wide. "Come in," she said. "Everyone is so eager to meet you." Adrian stepped through the door, with Victoria's hand in his, and felt, rather than heard, the change in the room, the slight pause in conversation, the shift of attention, the collective turning of eyes toward the door. He didn't adjust his posture. He didn't smile wider or pull his shoulders back or perform confidence. He just walked in, exactly as he was, exactly as he'd promised. And somewhere across the room, near the far window, an 81-year-old man in a good suit with rough hands and sharp eyes looked up from his drink and saw Adrian Carter walk through the door. Harold Sterling smiled, and it was the first real smile anyone in that house had produced all evening. Harold Sterling was not what Adrian expected. He'd built a picture in his head on the drive over a version of the man assembled from Victoria's description and his own experience with men who had started with nothing and ended with everything. He'd expected someone weathered and direct, yes. He'd expected the rough hands, but he hadn't expected the eyes. Harold Sterling had the eyes of a man who had spent 81 years watching people carefully and had developed, through that long practice, a near-perfect ability to identify exactly what someone was made of inside of 30 seconds. Those eyes found Adrian the moment he walked through the door, and the smile that followed was not the smile of a man being polite. It was the smile of a man who had just seen something he recognized. The room itself was full. Adrian cataloged it quickly, the way he cataloged any new environment, not anxiously, but with the practical attention of someone whose job required him to understand a space before he could work in it. Eleanor had guided them from the foyer into a large, formal sitting room where pre-dinner drinks were underway. There were perhaps 14 people. Most of them turned when he and Victoria entered. Most of the turns were the same, that rapid, assessing look that started at his face, moved to his suit, arrived at some internal conclusion, and then rearranged itself into something socially acceptable. He registered all of it without changing his expression. Victoria's hand was still in his. She was doing the same thing he was doing, reading the room, positioning herself, calculating. He could feel it in the slight tension of her grip. Not fear. Strategy. Victoria. A man stepped forward from the left side of the room. Mid-60s, silver-haired, built with the broad solidity of someone who had once been physically imposing and still carried the memory of it in his posture. Richard Sterling, her father. He had the same eyes as his daughter, sharp and thorough, but where Victoria's eyes processed and moved on, Richard's landed and held. "You look well, thank you, Dad." The cheek kiss. Performed with precision. "This is Adrian Carter." Richard Sterling extended his hand. Adrian took it. The handshake was firm in the deliberate way of men who use handshakes as assessments. Adrian matched it without escalating it. Not a contest. Just a greeting between two people who both understood what was actually happening. Adrian. Richard held the handshake one beat longer than necessary. "What is it you do?" "Direct, just like Victoria said. Building operations and facilities management. I oversee the maintenance systems at Sterling Stations." Not a flinch, not a qualifier. Just the truth, stated at the same volume and with the same confidence as any other true thing. Richard Sterling's expression didn't change, but something moved behind it, a very small recalibration. The kind you make when the answer you receive is not the answer you predicted, and you need a moment to update your model. "I see," he said. "Richard." Harold Sterling appeared at his son's elbow, moving with the careful but determined pace of a man who had decided that age was not going to make him slow down, just more deliberate. He was shorter than his son by several inches, with white hair and the kind of face that had been lived in, fully, not just aged, but used. His hands, when he extended one to Adrian, were exactly what Victoria had described. Rough, real. Harold Sterling, Victoria's grandfather. "I've been waiting to meet you since she walked in. You were watching the door." "I'm always watching the door." 81 years old, and the most interesting things still come through it. Harold held Adrian's hand in both of his briefly, not a power move. Something warmer than that. Good hands. I work with them. I know. I could tell from across the room. He said it with evident satisfaction, the way a person confirms a suspicion they were confident in. Come find me later. I want to talk to you properly, not in this. He made a small dismissive gesture that somehow encompassed the entire formal gathering. Production. I'd like that. Harold nodded once firmly, as though something had been decided, and moved away. Richard was watching the exchange with an expression that Adrian couldn't fully decode, something between uncertainty and the particular discomfort of a man whose narrative about an evening has already begun to deviate from the script. Then Eleanor appeared with two other women, and the social machinery of the evening began to move in earnest, and Adrian was carried into it, the way you're carried into a current, not swept away, but engaged, required to move with it. The next 40 minutes were a masterclass in polite interrogation. It began with Carol. Victoria's aunt was a woman of approximately 55 who had perfected the technique of asking intrusive questions while maintaining an expression of such warm interest that objecting to them felt unreasonable. She found Adrian near the drinks table while Victoria was across the room with her mother, and she arrived at his elbow with a glass of white wine and a smile like a trap that had been decorated with flowers. So you work at Victoria's company. How wonderful. How long have you been there? 18 months. And you two have been together for 6 of those months. So you noticed each other fairly quickly. She's difficult not to notice. Carol laughed genuinely, he thought. No, she really isn't, is she? Even as a child, she walked into a room and everything rearranged itself. A sip of wine. She's never brought anyone home before, you know? Not once, in all the years since she took over the company. We'd all begun to wonder if a delicate pause. Well, whether she had simply decided that this part of life wasn't for her. That's an interesting assumption to make about someone. Oh, we didn't mean it critically. We love Victoria. We worry about her. She carries so much. Another sip. And you from New York originally? New Jersey. Moved here 12 years ago. Family there? A sister. My parents passed several years ago. I'm sorry to hear that. A brief pause that was appropriately respectful, and then smoothly moved past. And you have a daughter, Victoria mentioned. He hadn't known Victoria had mentioned Lily. He kept his expression level. I do, Lily. She's 8. And her mother is? She passed 3 years ago. Carol's expression shifted into something that was probably genuine sympathy, mixed with he could see it. The exact moment it happened, the rapid social calculation of how this information could be organized and filed and potentially referenced later. I'm so sorry, she said. That must be very hard. For both of you, we manage well, of course. A smile. Of course you do. It's just Victoria has a great deal on her plate, as you know. Running the company, the travel, the board commitments. It must be complicated, finding the space for all of it. A ready-made family situation, she said it gently, like she was concerned. Adrian looked at her. Carol. He said her name simply with zero aggression and zero apology. My daughter is the best part of my life. Anyone who's in my life is lucky to know her. I don't think of her as a complication, a beat. Carol opened her mouth. And Victoria doesn't either, he added quietly. Carol closed her mouth, smiled. Of course, she said, for the 3rd time. But the warmth in it had changed character, thinner now, slightly stretched. Of course she doesn't. She excused herself shortly after. Adrian turned back to his drink and found that Victoria had materialized at his side with the silent precision of someone who had been monitoring the conversation from across the room and had timed her arrival to the exact moment Carol retreated. How did that go? She's going to report back that I have a dead wife and a child and limited finances and that you should reconsider. Accurate. A pause. How do you feel? Fine. She's not wrong about the finances. Victoria looked at him sideways. You're remarkably unbothered. I told you. Fear is expensive. Before she could respond, a hand landed on her shoulder from behind. Light, familiar, proprietary, the hand of someone who had decided he had the right to touch her without announcement. Adrian turned. Marcus Hale was exactly what the name suggested. Late 30s, handsome, in the aggressively maintained way of men who treat their appearance as a business asset, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly mortgage payment. He had the smile of someone who had grown up, being told that his smile was one of his best features and had been deploying it strategically ever since. Victoria. He kissed her cheek before she could move smooth, fast, practiced. You look incredible, as always. Victoria stepped slightly to the left, which moved her incrementally closer to Adrian, and incrementally further from Marcus, and the movement was so subtle that only someone watching carefully would have noticed it. Adrian noticed it. Marcus, she said evenly. This is Adrian. Marcus turned to Adrian with the smile fully engaged. Adrian Carter, he said the full name, which meant he'd done his homework. I've heard well. Victoria mentioned you. Likewise. They shook hands. Marcus's grip was the kind that tried to establish something. Adrian's grip was the kind that didn't need to so. Marcus kept the smile exactly calibrated. Warm enough to seem friendly, measured enough to signal that the friendliness was conditional. Maintenance, is that right? Building operations. Right. As if the distinction was interesting. That's important work. Essential, really. Buildings don't run themselves. He said it with the specific generosity of a man being deliberately magnanimous about something he considers beneath discussion. They don't, Adrian agreed pleasantly. How did you two? Marcus gestured between them with his glass. I mean, how does that even happen? You must have had some moment. Most things start with a moment. Sure. The smile shifted. Slightly. It's just interesting, you know. Victoria's, she's very particular. About everything. I've known her for years, and I've never seen her well. He let it hang there, the unfinished sentence doing the work he wanted it to do. I've never seen her with someone like you. Victoria spoke before Adrian could. Marcus. Her voice was pleasant and absolutely frigid. How is your father? I heard Hale Capital had a difficult third quarter. The smile flickered. Just for a second. Dad's fine. The quarter was a short-term fluctuation, of course. Victoria matched his smile with one of her own. Short-term fluctuations happen to everyone. Marcus looked at her, then at Adrian, then back at her. The smile came back, but it had changed quality. The warmth had been removed and something else put in its place. Something more careful, more calculating. Adrian recognized the look. It was the look of someone who had just moved from sizing up the situation to actively planning around it. Looking forward to dinner, Marcus said smoothly. Great catching up. He moved away. Victoria let out a breath that was too controlled to be called a sigh, but communicated everything a sigh would have. He knows, she said quietly. He suspects, Adrian said. There's a difference. He doesn't know anything yet. He's going to spend dinner looking for the crack. Adrian watched Marcus cross the room and lean in to say something to a woman who was probably one of the cousins, the report being filed in real time. Let him look. She turned to face him. You're calm. I told you I would be. Most people aren't in situations like this. I've sat with a dying wife and a 5-year-old who didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming home, and I've kept my voice level. He said it without drama, without asking for anything from it. A man in an expensive suit asking pointed questions over dinner doesn't register as a crisis. Victoria held his gaze. Something moved across her face, not pity, nothing close to pity. Something more like recognition, like she had just understood something about him that she'd been approaching from the outside and had now gotten to the interior of. My grandfather wants to talk to you, she said. I know. I'll find him after dinner. Find him before if you can. He goes to bed early, his one concession to being 81, and if you wait until after dinner, you might miss your window. Where is he? She glanced across the room. Library. First door on the left, past the staircase. He disappears there when the gathering gets to be too much. Which, she checked her watch, should be approximately now. I'll go. I'll manage out here. I know you will. He set his drink down and moved across the room. The library was quiet and smelled like old paper and the particular warmth of a room that has a fireplace that actually gets used. Harold Sterling was in the chair closest to the fire with a glass of something amber and a book open in his lap. That he wasn't reading it was positioned too casually at the angle of a prop rather than an active engagement. He looked up when Adrian came in. Close the door, Harold said. Adrian closed it. Sit down, son. He sat. Harold studied him for a moment with those sharp eyes, taking his time, in no apparent hurry to fill the silence with anything that didn't need to be said. Victoria doesn't bring people home, Harold said finally. She mentioned that. She doesn't bring people home, Because the last time she brought someone here she was 23, young man named Fletcher. She was genuinely in love with him. My daughter-in-law spent the entire evening auditing the relationship until there was nothing left of it. He took a sip of his drink. Victoria never brought anyone here again. Adrian was quiet, listening. I watched you walk in tonight. Harold gestured with his glass toward the door. You came through that door the same way I used to come through doors when I was young, and people looked at me the way people in this house are looking at you. How did you come through doors? Like I had every right to be there. Not because anyone gave me the right, because I decided I had it. He looked at Adrian steadily. That's not something you can practice. Either you have it or you don't. It comes from knowing who you are when nobody's watching, or from not caring what happens when everyone is. Harold pointed at him. Yes, exactly that. A log shifted in the fireplace. Tell me about your daughter, Harold said. Adrian smiled. Not a performed smile. The real one. The one that happened when someone asked about Lily without using her as a data point. Her name is Lily. She's 8. She just did her first solo reading presentation at school, a whole chapter book, read in front of her class. She cried on the first day of 2nd grade, and then walked into 3rd grade, like she owned it. She has opinions about everything, and states them with a confidence that I find both familiar and slightly alarming. Familiar how? A beat, her mother. Harold nodded. She's gone. 3 years. That's recent in some ways. In others it feels like a different lifetime. Harold was quiet for a moment, looking at the fire. My wife died 11 years ago, he said. Eleanor tells me I should be over it by now. I tell Eleanor that she fundamentally misunderstands how love works. He swirled his drink. You don't get over losing someone who was genuinely worth loving. You just learn to carry them differently. Adrian looked at him. Yeah, he said quietly. That's exactly it. Harold studied him. Why are you here tonight, Adrian? And I want the honest answer, not the one you rehearsed in the car. Adrian held his gaze without flinching. Victoria needed someone in her corner. She needed someone her family couldn't buy or impress or dismiss. She asked me and I said yes. That's the surface answer. What's underneath it? He thought about it honestly. I recognized something in her, he said. That first night in her office. The way she was holding herself together, the enormous effort of it. I know what that looks like from the inside. And I know what it costs. He paused. I wasn't going to walk past that and pretend I didn't see it. Harold Sterling was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. I built the first Sterling Industries location myself, he said. Me and 2 other men. We worked 16-hour days for 3 years. My wife made sandwiches and brought them to the site because we couldn't afford to stop for lunch. He paused. When the business became successful, really successful, my son hired consultants and bankers and attorneys and completely forgot what it felt like to build something with your hands. He forgot that the worth of a thing comes from the work, not from the valuation. He sat back. My granddaughter has not forgotten. She works harder than anyone in that company because she learned it from watching me. But she learned it alone because her father had already stopped teaching by the time she was old enough to listen. He looked at Adrian. She needed someone to learn it from eventually. She found me. A pause. I think she may have found you too. We haven't known each other very long. I knew my wife was remarkable the first time I talked to her. He gestured with his drink. Time is a measurement, not a qualification. Adrian looked at the fire. He heard what Harold was saying, beneath what Harold was saying, and he didn't push it away or redirect it. He let it sit, because it wasn't false. And the things that aren't false deserve to be acknowledged, even when they're complicated, even when they arrive before you were ready for them. She's extraordinary, he said quietly, whatever happens. Harold looked at him. Yes, he said, she is. A pause. Don't let the people in that dining room tell you otherwise. They won't. Harold studied him one final moment. Then he smiled, that same real smile from across the room. Good, he said. Now let's go eat before Eleanor sends someone to retrieve me and ruins my exit. Dinner at the Sterling table was served in a formal dining room, with 12 around the table, candles, and a silence between every exchange of conversation that carried the specific weight of things not being said. Adrian was seated next to Victoria, which was the only seating arrangement that made any sense, and across from them, by the particular design of whoever had arranged the place cards, sat Marcus Hale. To Marcus's left was cousin Daniel, late 20s, with the restless, resentful energy of a man who believed himself to be owed something he had never quite received. To Marcus's right sat cousin Rachel, who was quieter than her brother but watched the table with the attentiveness of someone collecting information. Richard Sterling sat at the head. Harold sat at the foot. Between them, the evening had the architecture of a trial. It began innocuously enough. Soup was served. Wine was poured. Richard asked about the company's recent expansion into the European market, which drew Victoria into a professional discussion that was clearly designed to test whether Adrian would lose ground while she was occupied elsewhere, left to fend for himself among people who had decided he was a problem to be managed. Daniel made the first move. So, Adrian, the same opening Carol had used the false casualness of people who are about to ask something pointed. What exactly does facilities management involve? Day-to-day, I mean. Building systems oversight, HVAC, electrical, plumbing infrastructure, mechanical systems, managing the team of technicians who maintain everything, coordinating with contractors when there are projects beyond the in-house capacity. Sounds like a lot of physical work. Most of it, yes. Daniel nodded as though this was interesting to him. Victoria always seemed like someone who'd end up with "I don't know." Someone in finance or law. He said it with a smile that performed innocence very well. Not that there's anything wrong with what you do. Essential work, like Marcus said. Essential landed again. The same word Marcus had used. The same gentle, condescending emphasis. Victoria opened her mouth. Adrian put his hand over hers briefly on the table. Not a warning. A request. Just a second. She felt it and closed her mouth. He looked at Daniel. Tell me what you do, Daniel. A brief pause. I'm in real estate development. What kind? Primarily residential. High-end, so you sell houses to people who can already afford them. The table shifted, slightly. A collective inhale. Daniel's smile thinned. That's one way to describe it. I fix the systems that keep buildings livable for the people inside them. When the heat goes out in January and there's a family on the 14th floor, I'm the one who gets it back on at 2 in the morning. He said it without elevation, without performance. Just accurate. I'm not suggesting it's more valuable than what you do. But essential seems like the right word for both of us. Daniel had no response to that. Rachel, across the table, looked like she was trying very hard not to smile. Eleanor pivoted smoothly, the way experienced social navigators pivot when a conversation needs redirecting. Adrian, Victoria tells us you've been at the company for some time. You must enjoy the work to have stayed. I do. The work is honest. Something's broken. You find the problem. You fix it. I appreciate that clarity. And you were in this field before Sterling Innovations? Similar work, different companies. I've been in building operations for about 12 years. A long career. Eleanor's smile was perfect. And your family, you mentioned a daughter earlier. Lily, was it? Victoria's hand tightened slightly under the table. Yes, she's 8. She lives with you full-time, I understand. Yes. That must be. Eleanor paused with the delicate calculation of someone choosing a word that will do specific work. Demanding, as a single parent, particularly given the hours Victoria keeps. The table registered it. The implication was clear to everyone. This is a complication. This man has a complicated situation. Victoria is walking into something difficult. Adrian looked at Eleanor Sterling. It's the best thing in my life, he said simply. Not demanding thing. A pause. Of course, Eleanor said. For the 4th time tonight, someone said of course to him, in a way that meant almost precisely the opposite. Marcus set his wine glass down. I'm curious, he said. Pleasantly. To the table in general, and to Adrian specifically. How you two actually navigate it. The dynamic, he gestured vaguely. Victoria runs the company. You work in the company. Doesn't that create, I don't know, an awkward position? We keep it professional at work, Victoria said. Of course. Marcus nodded. But I mean underneath that. You're not equals professionally, does that ever? Another diplomatic pause. Create friction? Adrian looked at Marcus. Do you ask that question to couples where the man earns more than the woman? The table went very still. Marcus's smile was entirely unmoved. A different situation, is it? The power differential is. The same in both cases. Just pointing in a different direction. Adrian kept his voice even. Not aggressive, precise. If the question matters in one version, it should matter in both. Marcus looked at him across the table. The smile was still there. But the calculation behind it had shifted, upgraded, recalibrating. He had been expecting someone who would be flustered, apologetic, eager to bridge the gap. He had not been expecting someone who would engage with the actual logic of what he was saying and dismantle it with the specific patience of a man who had done this, argued something true against something comfortable many times before. Richard Sterling cleared his throat. "Victoria," he said, pivoting. "We wanted to talk to you this evening about the Hale proposal. I know you've been Dad, reluctant to formalize." "Dad." The table went quiet. Victoria put down her fork. She looked at her father, the way she looked at a board member, who was about to make a significant mistake, calmly, clearly, with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided what she is going to say and is simply waiting for the correct moment to say it. "I brought Adrian here tonight," she said, "because I wanted you to meet the person who matters to me. I didn't come here to discuss the Hale proposal. I thought I had communicated that clearly enough through my extended unavailability, but apparently I need to be more direct." Richard's jaw tightened. "Victoria, I'm not finished, not loud, not angry, just absolute. I have built this company, the company that you started, but that I have grown beyond anything it was when you handed it to me, and I have done it on my terms, with my judgment, and those terms and that judgment have proven themselves repeatedly. I am asking you to extend the same trust to my personal life." Silence, not the performative silence of a table waiting for the next conversational move. Real silence. The kind that happens when something true has been said plainly in a room full of people who have been working around it for years. Marcus spoke. "Victoria." His voice was careful, measured. A different register than before, lower. More intimate, as though he was pivoting from the table conversation to something more personal, more private, leveraging the history between them. "I think what everyone here wants." "Marcus," she looked at him. "What everyone here wants and what I want are not the same thing. And I think we've always both known that." He held her gaze, and then he made the decision. Adrian would recognize it later, the exact moment Marcus Hale chose to play the card he'd been holding all evening, probably since before the evening started. The card he'd been carrying in his pocket, like a grenade he was waiting for the right moment to pull the pin on. "Can I ask you something honestly?" Marcus said. And his voice was warm now, concerned. The performance of a man who hates to be the one to bring this up, but really feels he has to. "Has Victoria told you about how you two actually started? The real version?" The table shifted. Adrian looked at him steadily. "Because," Marcus spread his hands, "I have to be honest. I've heard things from people inside the company about how this started." He looked at Adrian with something resembling regret. "You're being presented as her husband, but that's not quite accurate, is it? You two aren't actually married. And the way it started," he glanced at Victoria, "wasn't quite as organic as it's been implied tonight." The room held absolutely still. Eleanor's hand stopped moving. Richard looked at his daughter. Harold, at the far end of the table, had gone very quiet, watching. Marcus looked at Adrian with the expression of a man performing reluctance. "Is that true? That this started as something else? Something arranged?" And this was the moment. Adrian understood it completely. This was the crack Marcus had been looking for all evening, the one he'd apparently found through someone inside the company, through some fragment of overheard conversation, some whispered tale. He was deploying it now because he'd timed it carefully. Dinner underway, wine consumed, the family already primed with doubts about Adrian's legitimacy. He was betting that the exposure would collapse everything. That Adrian would be embarrassed, that Victoria would be cornered, that the chaos would leave her without a credible position, and the Hale arrangement would slide back into place as the only stable option. He was very good at this. He had read almost everything correctly. Almost. What he hadn't read, couldn't have read, because he had never been in a room with Adrian Carter for more than 2 hours, was that Adrian Carter did not lie, would not lie, had told Victoria explicitly that he would not lie, and had meant it with the same complete and simple certainty with which he meant everything he said. Adrian set down his fork. He looked at Marcus, then he looked at Victoria. She was very still. Her face was composed, the armor fully up, the CEO expression in place, impenetrable. But her eyes, when they met his, held something underneath all of it, a question, and a kind of trust that asked, How are you going to handle this? He turned back to the table. You're right, Adrian said. We're not married. I misspoke, actually. I made a mistake several weeks ago. I said something by accident, and it opened a conversation. He kept his voice level, unhurried, the way he spoke, when he was explaining something complicated that required clarity. Victoria needed support at this dinner. She asked me to come. I said yes. The room absorbed it. Daniel and Rachel exchanged a look. Eleanor's expression flickered through something rapidly. Richard Sterling sat absolutely still. Marcus allowed a brief, satisfied expression to cross his face, the expression of a man whose gamble has paid off. He turned to Victoria with something that performed compassion beautifully. Victoria, you don't have to. Let me finish. Victoria's voice cut through it. Clean and cool and entirely in control. She looked at Marcus, and her face was something he had never seen before, not the cold CEO, not the guarded daughter, but something underneath both of those. Something older, clearer, and considerably more dangerous. You're right that this started as an arrangement. You're right that Adrian came here tonight as a favor to me. She paused. But here is what you got wrong, Marcus. She looked around the table at her mother's stilled face, her father's rigid jaw, Carol's calculating attention, her cousin's wide eyes, and finally Harold at the end of the table with his drink and his quiet, watching eyes. What you got wrong is believing that the fact that it started as an arrangement invalidates what it is. She turned back to Marcus. You have known me for 4 years. In 4 years you have never once asked me what I was reading. You have never asked about my grandfather's health. You have never called me in the evening just to talk. You have never not once looked at me and seen anything other than the company and the position and the strategic value of being attached to it. She looked at Adrian. In 6 weeks, this man has done all of those things. Without being asked, without any incentive, without any benefit to himself whatsoever. She held his gaze, and her voice was completely steady, and what was in it was not manufactured for the audience. And he came here tonight, knowing exactly what this room was going to throw at him. And he walked in the door with exactly who he is. And he has not changed a single thing about himself in the last 2 hours despite every invitation to do so. She looked back at Marcus. So yes, it started as an arrangement. And what it became is realer than anything you have ever offered me. The table was completely silent. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. The smile was gone, not replaced by anger, something worse. The blank, recalculating expression of a man who has played his card and lost the hand, and is now doing the arithmetic on what comes next. He picked up his wine glass. Well, he said, and then he said nothing else. Richard Sterling looked at his daughter, then at Adrian. The look that passed between father and daughter was long and complex, the compressed communication of two people with a complicated history who have just arrived at a moment that neither of them had been expecting, and both of them understood that something had shifted in a way that couldn't be unshifted. Adrian watched Richard Sterling look at him, really look, not the assessing look from the foyer, but something more searching than that. And he didn't look away and didn't adjust anything about how he was sitting or how he was holding himself. He just looked back, and then Richard Sterling picked up his fork. The lamb is getting cold, he said. And Eleanor, with the instinctive social fluency of a woman who had managed Sterling family dinners for 40 years, turned to Rachel and asked about her job, and the table exhaled, and conversation slowly, carefully resumed around them. Victoria didn't look at Adrian right away. But under the table her hand found his, and held it, and this time, it wasn't steady. It was the grip of someone who has just been through something real, and is still coming down from it. And Adrian held her hand back with the same uncomplicated, unperforming certainty with which he did everything. The way he held Lily's hand when she was scared, the way he'd held Dana's hand in the hospital, the way you hold something that matters. At the end of the table, Harold Sterling lifted his glass very slightly in Adrian's direction. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Adrian dipped his chin. The lamb was objectively getting cold. He picked up his fork. And for the rest of dinner, the room was changed, not fixed, not resolved, not neatly concluded, but changed. The air had a different quality. Marcus ate without speaking much. Daniel asked Rachel something quiet. Eleanor refilled her wine. Richard cut his lamb and said nothing, but the silence he occupied was no longer the silence of a man who had already decided. It was the silence of a man who was thinking. And somewhere inside that shift, inside the changed air of that dining room, inside the grip of Victoria's hand, inside the look Harold had given him, across the length of the table, Adrian understood that the evening was not going the way anyone had planned. Not Marcus, not Eleanor, not even Victoria, who had planned for most scenarios. It was going somewhere else entirely, somewhere that none of them had mapped. And for the first time all evening, he had absolutely no idea what came next. That, more than anything, was how he knew it was real. The car ride back was quiet, not the quiet of two people who had nothing to say. The quiet of two people who had too much, and neither of them was ready to be the one who said it first. Victoria sat with her coat folded in her lap and her eyes on the city moving past the window. Adrian sat with his hands loose on his knees, and his gaze forward. The drive moved through Saturday night Manhattan with the smooth indifference of someone whose job was to get people from one place to another and not to register what they were carrying between those 2 points. They were 20 minutes from her building when she spoke. You didn't have to do that. He knew what she meant. The moment at the table when Marcus had deployed his information and Adrian had absorbed it, and neither denied nor deflected, but simply told the truth and handed it back to the room without apology. I told you I wouldn't lie. There's a difference between not lying and voluntarily confirming the most damaging thing someone could say about you in that moment. Only damaging if you think the truth is the problem. He paused. The truth wasn't the problem. She turned from the window to look at him. You gave Marcus exactly what he wanted. I gave Marcus the truth. What he wanted was to use it to humiliate you. Those aren't the same thing. He met her eyes. He got the first. He didn't get the second. Because the truth, when you just say it plainly without running from it, doesn't humiliate anyone. It just sits there and makes everyone else uncomfortable. She looked at him for a long moment. My father hasn't looked at me like that in years, she said quietly. Like what? Like he wasn't sure what I was going to do next. A pause. He always thinks he knows what I'm going to do. He's usually right. Tonight he wasn't. Is that good or bad? She thought about it honestly. I don't know yet. The car stopped at a light. Outside, a group of people crossed the intersection in the specific joyful chaos of a Saturday night. Someone laughing loudly. Someone else trying to hold an umbrella against a wind that didn't want to cooperate. Your grandfather, Adrian said. What about him? He toasted me at the end of the table. I saw. He didn't say anything. Just lifted his glass. That's Harold's highest form of approval. He doesn't give speeches. He doesn't make announcements. She paused. The last time he raised his glass at someone at that table, it was my first year as CEO. After I closed the first major international deal, my father was lukewarm about it. Harold raised his glass across the table and said nothing. A beat. It meant more than anything my father said that year. Adrian was quiet. He told me something in the library, he said. About your father. About how he built the company with his hands and your father forgot what that felt like. Victoria's expression shifted slightly. He told you that. Is it true? Yes, she said it without bitterness. Just factually, the way she stated most true things. My father is not a bad person. He's a man who had success and let it change his frame of reference. He forgot the beginning. Harold never did. You never did either. She looked at him. How do you know that? Because someone who'd forgotten the beginning wouldn't have spent an hour in the library listening to an 81-year-old man talk about building things with his hands. They'd have been working the room. She was quiet for a moment. I go to that library every time I come to this house, she said. It's the only room in that house where I can breathe. Because Harold's usually in it. Because Harold's usually in it. The car pulled to the curb outside her building. The driver waited. Neither of them moved immediately. What happens now? Adrian asked. Not with his own situation in mind, he could figure out his situation. He meant her family. The Hale arrangement. The fallout from the evening that was going to land somewhere in the next few days. My mother will call tomorrow morning. She'll be diplomatic and devastating simultaneously. Which is her particular gift. My father will say nothing for approximately a week, and then send me an email, which is how he processes things he doesn't have a script for. Marcus, she stopped. Marcus will recalibrate. He doesn't give up easily. But he also doesn't pursue things that have definitively closed. I think tonight was definitive enough. And the engagement announcement? Won't happen. Not now. A pause. Not ever, if I have anything to say about it. She said it with the quiet certainty of someone who has made a decision and is not interested in revisiting it. Good. She looked at him. That's all you have to say? It's your life. Good seems like the right response to you taking it back. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not the way things shift in movies where the moment announces itself. Quietly, like a room where someone has turned the light up by just a few degrees, and the whole space is different without any single source being obvious. She opened the car door, then stopped. Would you like to come up? She said it carefully. Not with implication, he could hear the careful. There's coffee. And I think I owe you approximately 3 hours of whatever the opposite of that dinner was. He considered it. He thought about the drive back to his quiet house, the porch light he'd left on, the kitchen where he'd sit alone, and replay the evening in the particular way his mind worked methodically, image by image. Yes, he said. They rode the elevator to the 14th floor in the same comfortable non-silence that had characterized most of the evening's better moments. Her apartment was large and warm, and surprisingly, given everything he'd built in his head about who Victoria Sterling was in her private life lived in. Not cluttered, but real. Books stacked on surfaces. A pair of running shoes by the door. 3 different houseplants at various stages of survival. A coffee table with a half-finished puzzle of a topographical map that looked like it had been in progress for some time. He looked at the puzzle. How long has that been going? She looked at it with mild embarrassment. 6 weeks. How many pieces? 2,000. What percentage done? 40, approximately. She moved past it toward the kitchen. I work on it when I can't sleep. It gives my hands something to do while my mind runs. Lily does the same thing with Legos. A pause from the kitchen. Really? She builds entire cities at 2 in the morning when something's bothering her. I find them in the morning on the living room floor. Whole street grids, buildings, little parks. All the feelings she doesn't have the words for yet. Victoria reappeared in the kitchen doorway. That's remarkable. She's a remarkable kid. She sounds like you. He looked up. What do you mean? You build things when something's complicated. You fix what's broken. You don't sit with the discomfort, you make something out of it. She leaned against the doorframe. She learned that from watching you. He didn't have an immediate response to that. Not because it wasn't true, because it landed somewhere that required a moment. Coffee's brewing, she said quietly, and disappeared back into the kitchen. He sat on the couch. Not formally actually sat, the way you sit in a place where you feel like sitting is permitted. He looked at the topographical puzzle. He could see the logic of it, the way she'd started with the edges, and was working inward, which was the methodical approach. The approach of someone who needed to establish the framework before tackling the interior. He picked up one piece, turned it, fitted it into a gap near the left border. That one goes there, she called from the kitchen. I know, I put it there. A pause. You can see the map without the box? You can see the contour pattern if you look at the elevation lines. She came in with 2 mugs and stopped when she saw him fitting another piece into the border. She sat down on the other end of the couch and handed him his coffee and looked at him, working the puzzle for a moment. Then she picked up a piece herself. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. Not a performing silence, not a charged silence. The quiet of 2 people who have survived something together and are letting themselves exhale in the only way that actually works, by doing something simple, something real, that has nothing to do with family dinners or corporate politics or the long, careful performance of the evening. He found a piece that completed a ridgeline. She found the matching valley section beside it. Their hands crossed briefly, reaching for the same area of the puzzle. Neither of them pulled back immediately. Then she set her piece down and sat back and picked up her coffee. Can I ask you something personal? Yes. When did you stop being angry about it? About losing her? He thought about it carefully. He appreciated that she asked it directly, without softening it into something more comfortable. I'm not sure anger is the right word for what I felt, he said. Anger implies there's someone to be angry at. There wasn't. It just happened. The wrong blood vessel in the wrong place at the wrong moment. He turned the coffee mug in his hands. What I felt was more like an argument I couldn't make. Like I kept wanting to state a case to someone, and there was no one there to hear it. What was the case? That it was too soon, that Lily was 5. That we had plans. He paused. The case didn't matter because there was no one on the other side of it. And learning to stop making that case, to stop rehearsing an argument that had no audience, that took probably 2 years. She was listening. The way she listened in the library with Harold fully, without preparing her response while he was still talking. What changed it? Lily read a whole sentence to me by herself for the first time. He smiled at it, even now. I'd been teaching her to read. We did it, every night 20 minutes. Sitting on her bedroom floor with the book between us. And one evening she just took over, read the whole sentence before I could start it, and looked up at me with this expression like she'd done something enormous, which she had. He paused. And I realized that I had been so focused on the thing I'd lost that I had almost missed the thing I was watching grow. And Dana would have been, he stopped. She would have been furious at me for that. She had very little patience for people who let grief become an excuse. Victoria was quiet. She sounds like someone who would have been difficult to argue with. Completely impossible. She was always right, and she knew it, and she had the particular quality of being right in a way that made you feel like arriving at the truth had been your own idea. He paused. I haven't talked about her this much in a long time. Is that all right? Yeah. He looked at her. It's more than all right. She held his gaze, and then said something he wasn't expecting. I'm afraid of this. He didn't pretend not to understand what this meant. I know, he said. I don't do this well. Personal things. I've been told that by multiple people in multiple ways, and the consistent feedback is hard to dismiss. She looked at the puzzle. I optimize everything. It's useful professionally. It's pause. It doesn't translate. Who told you that you don't do this well? Fletcher. The man I mentioned, the one I brought home at 23. She said it plainly. He said, I was emotionally unavailable. That being with me felt like being in a business meeting. She turned the coffee mug. He wasn't wrong. I just didn't know how to be different. Did you try? I thought performing the right things was the same as doing them. It isn't. She looked up. I understand that better now. What changed your understanding? She looked at him steadily. You came into my office with a glass of water and didn't ask for anything in return, she said. That's what changed it. He was quiet. That's a very low bar. It was, for me, an extraordinarily high bar, which tells you something about the baseline. She said it without self-pity, just with the clear-eyed accuracy she brought to everything. I'm not saying this to. She stopped. I don't know what I'm saying this to, actually. I just want you to know that I'm aware of my own deficits. I'm aware that whatever this is, it has liabilities on my side. Victoria, she looked at him. Everyone has liabilities, he said. I'm a 34-year-old widower with an 8-year-old and a job that most people in your circle think is beneath consideration. If we're listing liabilities, mine are substantial. Those aren't liabilities. To your mother they are. My mother's accounting system is not the one I use. He looked at her. What accounting system do you use? She held his gaze. Whether someone makes me feel like I can be honest, she said. Whether I feel, she stopped, started again. Whether I feel like I don't have to manage everything alone. Another pause, and this one cost her something. He could see it, the effort of saying a true thing without dressing it in professional language or ironic distance. Whether I feel less alone. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, the city moved. You're not alone right now, he said. She looked at him with the expression she'd had in the car outside her family's house, the one where the armor had briefly opened and he'd seen what was underneath. Tired, real. No, she said quietly. I'm not. They sat with that for a moment. Then, she picked up another puzzle piece and turned it in her fingers. Tell me something about Lily, she said. Something she did recently that made you laugh. He felt something ease in his chest. Last week, he said, she decided that the stuffed animals on her bed needed to be organized by emotional support capacity. Victoria looked up from the puzzle. What does that mean? Apparently, some stuffed animals are better at being comforting than others, and she had been keeping them in a random arrangement that she decided was emotionally inefficient. So she spent 45 minutes reorganizing them into a hierarchy. The bear she's had since she was 2 is at the top. A relatively new dinosaur that she won at a school fair is at the bottom because, and I'm quoting, he has big energy but low empathy. Victoria stared at him. Then she laughed, a real laugh. Not the almost law from Emery's, or the controlled near smile from The Office. A full, genuine laugh that surprised her as it came out, that she didn't have time to moderate or contain. It changed her face completely, he thought. There it is. There's who she is when nobody's watching. She's 8 years old, Victoria said. 8 years old, and completely certain about everything. She gets that from you. I've been told that. She was still smiling, looking at the puzzle, and the smile was the unhurried kind that stays after the laugh has finished because the warmth of the thing is still there. I'd like to meet her, she said. She said it quietly, casually, in the same tone you'd use if mentioned something you've been thinking about for a while, and have finally decided to say out loud. But it wasn't casual. He understood that. Coming from a woman who had spent years keeping her personal life entirely separate from everything else, who had built a wall between herself and the kind of vulnerability that came with genuinely meaning something to someone saying, I want to meet the most important person in your life was not a small thing. She'd like you, he said. You think so? She has very high standards and zero patience for people who talk to her like she's a child. You'd clear both. How do you know? Because you asked me about her tonight, like she was a real person and not a logistical complication. She'd noticed that. Victoria was quiet. Then I'm nervous about that. More nervous than the Sterling family dinner? Significantly, more nervous than the Sterling family dinner. A pause. Your family's opinion can't actually hurt me. Hers can. He looked at her. The honesty of it, the completely unguarded, unarmored honesty of it landed somewhere in him that he hadn't expected to be accessible tonight. Yeah, he said, it can. She nodded once, accepting it. They worked the puzzle for another 20 minutes. Found several more pieces. Made progress on the upper right quadrant where a mountain range was beginning to take shape. The city outside the windows settled into its late-night register, quieter, slower, the Saturday crowd thinning toward Sunday. At midnight he put on his jacket. I'll walk you out, she said. I know the way. I know you do. She walked him to the door anyway. He pulled on his jacket and she leaned against the door frame, and they stood in the particular suspended moment of people who have just spent an evening being real with each other and are now at the threshold between the real thing and the return to ordinary life, and both of them understand that the threshold is one way. You cross it and things are different. There was no going back to the version of them that existed before the office, before the accidental words, before the dinner and the library and the puzzle and the laugh. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Adrian. He stepped into the hallway, pressed the elevator button, stood waiting. Adrian. He turned. She was still in the doorway, the light from the apartment behind her. Whatever this is, she said, I don't want to manage it. She stopped. I want to let it be what it actually is. Without optimizing it. He looked at her for a long moment. That's the only way I know how to do anything, he said. She nodded. The elevator arrived. He got in. The doors closed. He rode down 14 floors and walked out into a Sunday morning Manhattan that was quiet and cold and smelled like October rain on asphalt, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, doing nothing, just being in the night air, feeling the specific expansiveness of a person who has moved through something significant and arrived on the other side of it different from how they went in. He drove home. The porch light was on. Eleanor called Victoria at 9:15 Sunday morning. Victoria had been awake since 7, running the early morning streets empty enough to think, and was back at the apartment with coffee when the phone rang. She looked at it for 2 rings, then answered. Good morning, Mother. Good morning. A pause that was carefully calibrated to communicate something without stating it. How are you feeling today? Fine, clear. Another pause. Last night was. Eleanor searched for the word. Eventful. It was. Victoria, I want you to understand that everything your father and I have done regarding Marcus has been. I know, Mom. She said it without hardness, genuinely. I know it came from concern. I know you weren't trying to. She stopped. I know you weren't trying to sell me. I know you thought you were protecting me. A silence. He's not who we expected, Eleanor said finally. No, she paused. He's different. He is. Your grandfather's, I dare you. Your grandfather called this morning, a different note in Eleanor's voice, something that might have been reluctant amusement. He told your father that he reminded him of himself at that age and that Richard should pay closer attention. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Of course he did. Your father didn't respond well initially. He never does when Harold says something true. Victoria, is this real? Genuinely real. Because if it is, she stopped again, and for a moment the careful social infrastructure of Eleanor Sterling's dropped just slightly, and what came through was something more tired, and more honest, and more recognizably maternal. If it's real, I want to understand it. I want a breath. I made a mistake with Fletcher. I know that. I didn't give you room. Another pause. I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Victoria sat with that for a moment. It was, she understood, as close to an apology as Eleanor Sterling was architecturally capable of producing, and it was more than she'd expected, more than she'd gotten before. It's real, she said. It's new and it's complicated, and I can't tell you exactly what it is yet because I don't fully know. But it's real. All right, Eleanor said quietly. All right, a pause. Bring him to dinner sometime. Properly, without the theater. Victoria was quiet. Okay, she said, and Victoria, yes, tell him a long pause. Tell him Harold hasn't called anyone since your first international deal. In 12 years. He called about Adrian this morning before 8 a.m. Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. I'll tell him, she said. She hung up. She sat with her coffee and looked at the puzzle on the coffee table and the pieces they'd placed last night, the mountain ridge, the valley section beside it. The two pieces that had been reached for simultaneously and placed by different hands in the same moment. She picked up her phone and texted Adrian. My grandfather called my father about you this morning. Before 8 a.m. He hasn't called about anyone in 12 years. Thought you should know. She put the phone down, looked at the puzzle, picked up a piece. Her phone buzzed. Harold is my kind of person. How's your morning? She looked at the message for a moment. Then typed, better than expected. His reply came back in 30 seconds. Lily wants to know if the person I went to dinner with last night likes horses. She's currently reading a book about them and considers it an important compatibility metric. Victoria read it twice. Something shifted in her chest, a specific warmth that she recognized, that she had felt across a dinner table and in a car and at a doorway, and that she was beginning to understand was not going away. She typed, Tell Lily I've never ridden one, but I'm open to learning. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, she says that's the correct answer. She also says, you can borrow the book when she's done. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, sat alone in her apartment on a Sunday morning with cold coffee and an unfinished puzzle and a phone in her hand, and smiled at it, the way people smile at things that have surprised them into joy. Before they had time to protect themselves from it, she put the phone down, picked up another puzzle piece. Outside, the city was waking up. The following Wednesday, Marcus Hale sent Victoria a brief, professional email. No sentiment, no negotiation. 4 sentences stating that he respected her decision, that he hoped their company's professional relationship would remain intact, and that he wished her well. She read it once, replied with 3 sentences of equivalent professionalism. And that was the end of 8 months of her family's planning, the Hale arrangement, and the version of her future that everyone except Harold had decided was appropriate for her. She sent it and closed her laptop and felt, with some surprise, almost nothing. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Just the clean, quiet clarity of a door that had been standing half open, finally, fully closed. That evening, her phone rang at 7:45. Adrian. Hey. His voice had the particular quality of a man who has just walked through the door from work and hasn't yet put anything down. She could hear the slight background noise of a kitchen, a cabinet, running water. How was your day? 4 words, simple as breathing. She had received calls from board members and investors and analysts and attorneys and her own family, and none of those calls had begun with "How was your day?" spoken in the uncomplicated way that you asked it when you actually wanted to know. Eventful, she said. Marcus sent an email. Officially? 4 sentences. Good. Yes. A pause. How was yours? I fixed a boiler on the 27th floor that has been making a noise for 3 weeks that I can only describe as existentially troubled. It's fixed now. It sounds normal. I feel I've done genuine good in the world. She laughed. An existentially troubled boiler. It was making a sound like it was reconsidering its choices. I recalibrated the pressure valve and it settled. You recalibrate everything. Seems to work. She leaned back in her chair. Lily, she said. How is she? Currently building what she describes as a feeling city out of Legos. She says it's a city where all the buildings represent different emotions. The tallest building is called the Determined Tower, and the smallest is a little house she's calling the Quiet Place. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's extraordinary. She's 8. She builds things. She builds things and names them. That's different, she paused. That's art. Silence on the line. Don't tell her that, he said. She'll start charging admission. Victoria laughed again, the real laugh, the one she hadn't been able to produce reliably for years before it started happening with some regularity in the last 2 weeks. Adrian. Yeah, I want to say something and I want to say it directly.
She stopped.
Without optimizing it. Okay. These last few weeks have been the most honestly human I've felt in a very long time. And that's because of you. And I don't know exactly what we are yet or what we're building toward, but I know I don't want to stop. A pause. I wanted to say that plainly, without making you work to hear it. Silence, not a bad silence, a held one. Victoria. Yes, Saturday. If you're not doing anything, there's a farmer's market near our neighborhood that Lily considers mandatory. She takes it very seriously. She has a specific route and specific vendors and a specific order of operations. It takes approximately 2 hours. A pause. I'd like you to come. She understood what he was offering. Not a date, not a formal introduction. An invitation into a Saturday morning, into the specific and ordinary texture of his actual life, into the thing he valued most, being trusted with someone else's presence. What time? She asked. 9. Dress for October. She will absolutely comment on your shoes. I'll wear the right shoes. She defines right differently than most people. I'll take my chances. Okay. A pause. Good night, Victoria. Good night, Adrian. She hung up. Sat in the quiet of her office. She was still at the building. She was always still at the building at 7:45 and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows and thought about a Saturday morning farmer's market and a specific route and a child who built cities out of Legos and named the buildings after feelings. She thought about the Quiet Place. The small house at the edge of the city. She thought, I know what that is. I've been looking for that for a long time. She turned off her desk lamp. She went home. The puzzle was waiting on the coffee table. She sat down and worked on it for an hour. The mountain range, expanding now, taking real shape, and when she went to bed at 10:30, she fell asleep quickly, without running through the day's problems or tomorrow's agenda, or the long arithmetic of everything she was managing. She just closed her eyes and slept. And when she woke up Saturday morning, she put on her good coat and her practical shoes, and her practical stood in front of the mirror for a moment and looked at herself the way you look at yourself when you're about to go somewhere that matters. Not the CEO in the mirror, not the armor, just her. She took a breath and went to meet them. Lily Carter saw Victoria before Victoria saw her. She was standing next to her father at the entrance of the farmer's market, wearing a bright orange jacket and holding a canvas tote bag that was almost as big as she was. And she spotted Victoria coming down the sidewalk from half a block away and turned to Adrian with the specific urgency of a child who has just confirmed a hypothesis. Dad, she's wearing boots. I told you to let her figure out the shoe situation herself. But they're good boots, like actually good. The kind with real soles. She said it with the gravity of someone issuing a professional assessment. She prepared. Adrian looked up. Victoria was a half block away. Coat buttoned against the October cold, her hair down, moving through the Saturday morning sidewalk traffic with the same certainty she moved through everything, not hurried, not performing ease, just present. She spotted them, and something in her face settled, the way a person's face settles when they see the thing they were walking toward and confirm it's really there. She closed the distance. Lily looked up at her. Victoria looked down at Lily. For approximately 2 seconds, the two most important people in Adrian Carter's world took each other's measure in complete silence. Then Lily said, Your boots have good grip, thank you. I read the weather report. Dad never reads the weather report. I read the weather report, Adrian said. You read it and then wear the wrong shoes anyway. Victoria looked at him with something that was absolutely a smile, being very carefully contained. She's not wrong, he said. Lily shifted the canvas, tote to her other shoulder with the business-like efficiency of someone who has places to be. We start at the apple stand because they run out of the good ones by 10. Then the bread place, but only the sourdough because the other ones are fine. but not worth the tote space. Then the honey people, you have to try the buckwheat one, even if it sounds weird. It's actually the best. She looked at Victoria to confirm she was receiving this information correctly. Do you like honey? I do. Good. Some people don't, and then the honey part of the route doesn't make sense for them. She turned and started walking with the confidence of someone who knows exactly where she's going. Come on, the apples won't wait. Victoria fell into step beside Adrian. He looked at her sideways. Prepared? He asked quietly. I've walked into boardrooms with hostile shareholders, she said under her breath. I can handle a farmer's market route. The shareholders didn't have opinions about your footwear. Valid point. Lily was already 3 steps ahead, navigating the market with the focused competence of a very small general executing a very specific campaign. She knew which vendors to greet by name. Mr. Okonkwo at the apple stand, who gave her a small sample of a variety she hadn't tried before, and listened seriously while she described the flavor profile. The bread woman, Rosaria, who had apparently been saving a specific sourdough loaf with a good ear on it, because she knew Lily preferred them that way. Victoria watched all of it. She watched Lily negotiate, deliberate taste, assess. She watched Adrian move through the market the way he moved through every space present. Unhurried, letting Lily run the operation while staying close enough to catch whatever needed catching. She watched the way vendors responded to both of them, the easy warmth of people who'd been coming to the same place every Saturday long enough to become part of the texture of it. This was his real life. Not the building on the 38th floor. Not the maintenance elevator or the after-hours corridors. This. A Saturday morning with a canvas tote and an 8-year-old with strong opinions about sourdough and a route she'd designed herself. It was the most ordinary thing Victoria had been part of in years. She hadn't understood, until this moment, how much she had been missing ordinary. At the honey stand, Lily held up the buckwheat jar with both hands like an offering. You have to try it, she told Victoria. I know it looks darker than regular honey, but that's actually why it's better. The color means it has more stuff in it. More stuff, Victoria repeated. More nutrients, or something. Dad explained it once, but I mostly remember that the color is the good sign. The vendor, a bearded man who looked like he found this exchange delightful, offered a small tasting spoon. Victoria took it, tried it. Lily watched with the focused attention of a scientist awaiting results. Well, Lily asked. It tastes like the end of summer, Victoria said. Lily considered this very seriously. That's actually a perfect description, she said. I'm going to use that. She turned to the vendor. We'll take a large jar. Adrian caught Victoria's eye over Lily's head. She was smiling. Not the contained near smile. Not the professional warmth. The real one. The full one. The one that had surprised him the first time it arrived, in her apartment at midnight over a puzzle, because it transformed her completely into someone he couldn't look away from. He looked away anyway, but it took a moment. They ate lunch at a small diner 3 blocks from the market. Lily's post-route tradition, she explained, because all the walking and deliberating required significant caloric recovery. She ordered chocolate chip pancakes, which Adrian had apparently predicted to Victoria in advance, because when the order arrived, Victoria produced a look of recognition that Lily immediately clocked. Did he tell you I always get these? He mentioned a pattern. I'm predictable, Lily said, without any apparent distress about this. But predictable isn't bad if what you're predictable about is good things. She cut a precise triangle from the stack. Like if you're predictably kind, that's good. If you're predictably mean, that's bad. The thing matters more than the predictability. Silence. Victoria looked at her across the table. That's genuinely wise, she said. Lily looked back at her with Dana's eyes, the ones that saw things and didn't soften what they found. Dad said you're very smart, she said. Did he? He said you're the kind of smart where you can see the problem inside a problem. Like, not just the top one, but the one underneath it. She stabbed another triangle of pancake. I'm trying to learn that. I can usually see the top problem, but the underneath one is harder. The underneath one is always harder, Victoria said. It takes practice. Did you practice, or did you just know? I practiced. I made a lot of mistakes first. Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. Dad says mistakes are just data. Your dad is right. Lily looked at him, then at Victoria. then back at her pancakes with the expression of someone who has gathered sufficient information and is now processing it internally. Adrian drank his coffee and said nothing, and felt something that he hadn't expected to feel this morning. Something that had been building incrementally since the apple stand, and the bread woman, and the buckwheat honey, and the walk, and the diner a specific fullness. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but settles into a person quietly and permanently, like something slotting into the place it was always meant to occupy. Lily looked up. Victoria, yes. Do you want to see my feelings city? When it's done. She said it carefully, in the particular tone she used when she was offering something she actually cared about. I'm still building it, but it's getting close. Victoria looked at her. I would really like that, she said. Lily nodded once, the way Harold Sterling nodded, as though something had been decided. Then she went back to her pancakes. Adrian looked at the table, at his coffee, at his daughter eating with her feet swinging above the diner floor, at Victoria across from him with her hands wrapped around her own mug and her good boots and her real smile. He thought about 6 words, spoken by accident, in an empty hallway. He thought about the look on her face when she said, "Say that again." He thought about what it was like to be a man who had lost the center of his world and rebuilt himself around his daughter and his work and the quiet, practical life he had made from what remained, and to have that life interrupted not by drama or design, but by a glass of water, an honest answer, and an accidental sentence that turned out to be more true than he'd known when he said it. 2 years later, people still asked him about it. Colleagues, parents from Lily's school, his sister, who had heard the full version approximately 11 times and still requested it at family dinners. The journalist who interviewed Victoria for a profile in a business magazine and asked, almost as an afterthought, about her personal life. They always wanted to know how it started. He always told them the same thing. Not the boardroom version, where he'd slammed his hand on the desk and made the room go still. Not the polished narrative, the real one. A Wednesday evening. A 38th floor. A thermostat that needed replacing, and a woman trying very hard to hold herself together, and a glass of water that nobody asked for, and 6 words that came out of a tired, distracted, genuinely caring place inside him that hadn't been accessed in a long time. I'll take care of my beloved wife. He hadn't meant them as a confession. He hadn't meant them as a promise. He'd meant absolutely nothing by them, in the technical sense. They too were the automatic output of a man whose instincts ran ahead of his awareness. But instincts, he had learned, are the one part of a person that doesn't perform. They respond to what's actually there, and what was actually there, behind the armor and the ice and the title that made everyone keep their distance, was a person worth caring about. He had seen it before his mind had caught up with the seeing. That was how it started. What came after was not a fairy tale. He was clear about that too when people asked. It was real, which meant it was complicated, which meant it required work. Victoria learned how to leave the office before 8. She learned how to sit on a kitchen floor and help with 3rd-grade fractions without optimizing the process. She learned that support animal hierarchy was a fixed system and was not subject to negotiation or reorganization. She sung some sassy mornings. The route at the farmer's market would be modified because Lily had a new theory about the sequence, and the correct response was to follow the modification without comment. Adrian learned how to exist in rooms full of people who assessed his worth by metrics that had nothing to do with him, and to let their assessments pass through without landing. He learned how to let someone take care of things sometimes. That was the harder one, accepting help from a person who was capable of giving it without feeling like the acceptance diminished anything. Victoria had been patient with him about that. Patient in the direct, no-nonsense way she was patient. About most things not soft, but clear. You're allowed to let me carry something. That's not weakness. That's just how it works when there are 2 of you. She was right. She was often right. He had learned to find that more endearing than alarming. The board of directors challenge came 14 months in. A senior board member named Caldwell, silver-haired, old money, the kind of man who had been comfortable with the existing order of things for so long that any deviation felt like a personal affront, raised the question in a quarterly meeting that Victoria was running. He framed it as a governance concern. He used the words professional judgment and personal entanglements and perception of conflict, and he was careful and diplomatic and absolutely clear about what he meant underneath the careful diplomacy. He meant, the CEO is in a relationship with a maintenance employee, and it makes us uncomfortable, and we think it reflects poorly on her judgment. Victoria let him finish. She did not look at the table or the window or her notes. She looked at Caldwell. "I want to make sure I understand the concern," she said. "You're suggesting that my personal relationship affects my professional judgment. I'm raising it as a question of, I heard how you raised it." She put both hands flat on the table. "Let me tell you what affected my professional judgment, Mr. Caldwell. 18 months of a board that approved a facilities contractor at $40,000 who couldn't diagnose a sensor calibration issue that a member of my in-house team identified and resolved in 40 minutes. She held his gaze. "The man you're concerned about saved this company money, time, and the reputation loss that comes with infrastructure failure. He did it because he's exceptionally good at his job. My personal feelings about him are separate from that assessment and have always been." Caldwell was quiet. "My judgment," Victoria continued, "is the reason this company's revenue has grown 32% over the last 3 years. I would like the board to consider whether that judgment has, on balance, served the company well before questioning whether I'm capable of running my own life." The room was silent. Then Harold Sterling's oldest friend on the board, a man named Walter Park, who had been in the room for the original Sterling Industries founding, and whose opinion carried the specific weight of institutional memory, cleared his throat. "I think the matter is settled," Walter said mildly. It was settled. Caldwell did not raise it again. Adrian heard about it that evening, over dinner at his kitchen table with Lily doing homework 3 feet away, and Victoria cutting bread at the counter with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned where things were kept. "You didn't tell me it was happening," he said. "I didn't want you to worry about it." "Victoria," she looked at him. "I can handle my own board," she said. "I know you can. I also know that when things affect both of us, we handle them together." That was the deal. A pause. She set the bread knife down. "You're right," she said. "I handled it alone, because that's my default. I'm still working on the default, I know." He looked at her. "How did it go?" And she told him. All of it. The way Caldwell had framed it, the way she'd responded. Walter Park's 4 words that closed the room. She told it plainly, without drama, the way she told him things. Now not managing his reaction, not editing for presentation. Just telling him. Lily looked up from her homework. "What's a board of directors?" "People who help run a company," Adrian said. "Did they try to be mean to Victoria?" "One of them tried." Lily looked at Victoria with an expression of complete solidarity. "People are weird about stuff that doesn't matter," she said with the certainty of a 10-year-old who has strong feelings about fairness. Then she went back to her homework. Victoria looked at her. Then at Adrian. Something moved across her face, not the complicated layered thing that usually moved across it when she was processing something difficult. Something simpler, something that didn't need analysis or armor or management. Just gratitude, plain and full and real. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over and held his back. "Lily," without looking up from her homework. "Are you two doing the hand thing again?" "Yes," Adrian said. "Okay," Lily said. "Just checking." The foundation came later, Victoria's idea. Built from a conversation she'd had with Adrian one night, when he came home late from a call from a colleague whose situation mirrored his own from 3 years ago. Single father, sudden loss, no support system, trying to hold a job and raise a child, and keep breathing all at the same time. She had been awake when he got home and had listened to him talk about it, and had said, there should be something. For people in exactly that position, something real, not a hotline. They built it together, not metaphorically. Literally together, Victoria with the structural and financial architecture, Adrian with the operational reality of what people in crisis actually needed versus what organizations typically offered. They called it the Dana Carter Foundation, and he hadn't asked her to use Dana's name, and she hadn't asked permission. She had simply told him, when the paperwork was filed, what she'd named it. He had not said anything for a long time. Then he had said, she would have had opinions about the organizational structure. I assumed as much. I built in flexibility for that reason. She'd have liked you. Victoria had looked at him. I hope so, she said quietly. I would have liked her. The foundation served single parents in crisis housing support, emergency childcare, job placement, education access. In its first 2 years, it helped over 400 families. Lily, at 10 years old, designed the logo, a small house with a light on inside it. Because, she explained, when you come home and the light is on, it means someone's there. People who need help need to know someone's there. The logo was used exactly as she designed it. Nobody suggested changes. Years later, when people asked Adrian Carter how he had managed to build the life he had, the foundation, the family, all of it, he always laughed. Not dismissively, with genuine pleasure at the question, because the answer was so much simpler than the question deserved. He hadn't managed anything. He had simply shown up. He had knocked on a door that was 2 inches ajar because the sound behind it told him someone needed a glass of water. He had told the truth when lying would have been easier. He had walked into a room full of people who wanted him to feel small and felt nothing of the kind, because the size of a man is not determined by the room he's standing in. He had been himself, completely and without apology, and it had turned out that being himself was exactly enough. The words that started it, the 6 accidental words spoken into a phone while a woman stood 3 feet behind him, were never supposed to be said. They came from a place in him that was still, after 3 years of widowhood and survival and rebuilding, capable of warmth, capable of instinct, capable of speaking the truth before the mind had time to edit it into something safer. "I'll take care of my beloved wife." He had said it by accident, and Victoria Sterling had heard it and had known the way people know true things when they finally hear them spoken out loud, that the man who said it meant every single word. She had asked him to say it again. He had, and neither of them had stopped meaning it since. Some things don't begin the way you plan them. Some things begin with a mistake, a glass of water, a thermostat in need of replacing, and 6 words that fall out of a tired and honest heart into the exact silence that needed to hear them. And then they become the truest thing in the room. They become the only thing, in the end, that was ever really there.